Tantor Audio, a division of Recorded Books, presents Forest of Desire by Vasily Mahanenko, translated by Jared Firth, narrated by Henry Kramer. Chapter 1. Cold explosion. You're dead, Tailyn Vlashich. Alchemical fire. You're dead, Tailyn Vlashich. Acid. Your shield's gone. Your armor was eaten away too. You're dead, Tailyn Vlashich. Tailyn got to his feet and shot an annoyed glance over at Barad, a level 32 ranger who was doubled over laughing. Calling the whole thing a waste of time, the caravan leader was openly mocking the boys' attempts to fight back against Valia. He was convinced mages capable of using cards should stick to them, rather than jumping around the field like a goat with its butt on fire. But in those moments, all Tailyn could do was sigh heavily, and nod to let Valia know he was ready for the next round. The Colmar herbalist was hurling in his direction pieces of wood that had been painted different colors to stand in for alchemical flasks. It was Tailyn's job to pick out the color, say what the flask had inside, and correctly respond to the throw. Duck, block, or turn and run. Everything depended on the contents of what Valia was tossing at him. 6 months earlier, back when he'd just begun training, Tailyn had protested that she only ever threw potions he had no way of protecting himself against. Since then, Valia had written down on a piece of paper the exact order she was going to follow, and stuck to it, throwing the pieces of wood in that sequence. But that didn't really help. Not once had Tailyn been able to avoid death even 10 times out of every 30 throws. "You're not just a mage," Valia always said. "You're an alchemist. Your strength isn't cards. It's the ability to create and use different potions to match the situation. Remember the City of the Dead? The moment you ran out of charges for your cards, you were dead weight. You couldn't charge them, and you couldn't do anything to fight back against the mages. You couldn't do anything. Tailyn Vlashich, you have to get stronger. Go pick up the pieces, and bring them over here so we can go again." It was only once, the day after he began training, that Tailyn made the mistake of not falling in line with his trainer, and Valia decided to show him up. After heading 100 meters away, she turned and yelled back at the boy, "Stop me any way you can. No matter how, just stop me." The herbalist sprinted toward the stunned kid, who hadn't so much as pulled out his cards, and threw a freeze potion that turned Tailyn's legs into pieces of ice, and that was despite his armor and shield level. His regeneration told him it was going to need a good 5 hours to restore him to working order, but Valia wasn't done. As soon as Tailyn had recovered, she jumped in for another round. "Stop me, whatever it takes." That time, Tailyn wasn't caught sleeping. As soon as she started moving, enormous balls of fire came flying at her, accompanied by electric strikes. The boy had become adept at using his cards, switching the order around with just an eye movement. His 3rd-generation outdoor headgear for mages, or OHM3, made that as easy as pie. But it was useless. The herbalist ignored the fireballs and paid no attention to the electricity. Running up to the boy, she tossed another potion at him, that time liquid fire, and Tailyn howled like he never howled before. The heat cut through his shield and baked him alive, while Valia did nothing to ease his suffering. But 6 hours later, once his regeneration had brought him back from the brink, and his costume had restored itself, Valia tried a 3rd time. "Stop me, whatever it takes." She went back to the 100-meter mark. That round, Tailyn decided to go all out, bringing his wave of fire, his most powerful weapon, to bear. It was better to mourn the herbalist's death than let her mutilate him yet again, he decided. But oh, how naive he was. Valia didn't run at him. Striding easily, she moved right through the inferno, the flames doing exactly nothing to her. Tailyn spent 50 charges, turning the field they were training on into scorched earth, but the herbalist just laughed it off. Her 3rd flask contained an acid that had the boy wishing he were back to being burned alive. Feeling his flesh dissolve, that was real pain. 12 hours later, Tailyn had wised up, and was standing in front of Valia ready to get back to training. The question of how was plastered all over his face, and the herbalist responded by showing him the description of one of her flasks. Salamander potion. Description: rare item. Forms a salamander skin that lets you ignore thermal damage for 30 seconds. People who actually are alchemists, rather than just sporting the title, have lots of tricks up their sleeves. There's a potion that answers any card a mage might use. Just take that Nemean lion. You can put it to sleep. If I'd had my arsenal with me, we would have left the City of the Dead at the head of an army of captive lixes. I got too used to peace and quiet. It was a bald-faced lie. Valinil had only gotten the potion she had with her a couple days before, but the boy didn't need to know that. There's a lot you need to learn, Tailyn Vlashich, and if you'd like to continue, you need to declare me your trainer. That's the only way I can pass my knowledge on to you. Valinil Revolt would like to be your trainer. Accept? And that was when Tailyn's life changed. Valinil cut a deal with Motar, and every day when his lessons with the herbalists were over, the boy had sword and dagger lessons. He didn't have anything else to do either. Isor continued to ignore him, so he just spent 12 hours a day training. But Tailyn didn't even have the rest of the time to relax, spending it studying the encyclopedia Valia had given him. Soon enough, he cursed whoever had written it, the girl, and really the process itself. You couldn't just open the book and read whatever you wanted. Instead, Tailyn had to start from the very first page and memorize the whole thing. The book somehow knew when he was reading, as opposed to when he was just leafing through, and it would keep him from turning to the next page. Not only that, but it also knew when he'd forgotten something he'd read before, pulling it back up to relearn. Over the previous 6 months, Tailyn had made it a third of the way, and hated the book with all his heart. But he was at least positive that even if someone woke him up in the middle of the night and tested him on it, he'd be able to quote any of the paragraphs he'd learned. That's enough for today. Another series of 30 pieces of wood had come and gone with just 6 blocked correctly. You're not seeing the colors anymore. They're impossible to see, the boy muttered, as he dug around in the grass to find the stick. It's dark out. You think the enemy is going to wait for you to rub your eyes? The woman replied harshly. Set up the training dummy and get to work with your sword. It was the caravan's second week spent moving through the Greylands. Made up of 10 covered wagons packed with people, Tailyn thought it strange that most of them were numerical farmers, herdsmen, and tanners. They were all scared stiff and huddled together, afraid to catch so much as a glimpse of the area around them. They didn't even get out of the wagons, though Tailyn wasn't exactly at ease either. There were all too many rumors floating around when it came to the Greylands. It was supposedly populated with monsters, lixes running free, and a new horror sitting behind each bush. But 2 weeks later, they'd come across nothing but the odd tree, enormous boulders, and deep ravines. The boy didn't have time to think about that, however, as he spent all his time training. As soon as Valinil had heard that he was going to be sent off with the caravan, she ran off to talk with Isor. And while Tailyn had no idea what they discussed, she left her meeting with him the owner of a letter with his signature on it. Barad spent a long time turning it over and holding it up to the light, suspecting a trick, and he even went to Isor himself, but in the end, he had to throw up his hands and free up another spot in the caravan. Valinil was going with them. Of course, beyond the peasants, there were serious fighters, too. 10 people just as morose and austere as the caravan leader. All of them topped level 30. They were well equipped, and they kept their eyes fixed on their surroundings, in search of anything out of the ordinary. At the beginning, Tailyn tried to strike up a conversation with them. They just stared right through him, however, and since there was no point talking with the numericals, he was left with Valinil. She'd let him know that Valia really had disappeared more than a month before. Her father had put together a manhunt, setting an incredible reward, only she'd been kidnapped in a completely different part of the Empire than the one they were in then. After setting up the dummy, Tailyn sighed, pulled out his sword, and began dodging the advanced mechanism's feints. Motar hadn't told him where he'd gotten the monster. One day, he'd just shown up, and announced that it was from all the guards, and one other person, apologizing for how rude they'd been, and thanking the boy for saving their lives. The human-like device didn't just stand there. It was practically alive. It moved, spun, attacked, sliced. For the first few months, Tailyn toiled away at the inept level, before moving up to novice. Finally, he'd mastered the first 3 of 7 apprentice training levels. "Quiet down," barked one of the guards, though Tailyn ignored him. He much preferred swordplay to figuring out and reacting to the pieces of wood, and judging by the progress bar that showed up every time he started training, he was already halfway to the 4th level, or senior apprentice. He'd had to unlock the strength and agility attributes to feel more comfortable with the whole thing. Of course, he knew they were pointless for someone who could use cards, but Valinil had insisted he diversify his weaponry, even giving him the gold so he could unlock the attributes without burning through his savings. With that said, the boy had parted ways with 1,000 gold of his own to unlock a little something else. Strength. Description. An attribute that impacts your stamina and ability to lift weights. Note: for the alchemist class, this attribute does not affect physical attack, does not integrate with enhancement. Agility. Description. An attribute that impacts your speed, mobility, and coordination. Note: for the alchemist class, this attribute does not affect physical attack, does not integrate with enhancement. Concealment. Description: an attribute that lets you hide your parameters from other people, including by replacing them. In order to read your name, level, and age, the other person's perception should be equal to or higher than your concealment. Leveling up his strength and agility seemed like an absurd idea to Tailyn. Not only that, but just having them meant that if he got an update to the coordinates or ancient history missions, the god might spend invaluable points on an attribute he didn't need in the least. Speaking of missions, the day after getting back to Colmart, the boy had headed off to see the god and get some answers. He'd been looking to find what release, player, and exodus meant, but he came up empty. That information will be made available after your initiation is complete. I told you to stop. The training sword was yanked out of his hands. Tailyn stopped, breathing heavily, as he'd been fighting off the dummy on reflexes alone the whole time he'd been reminiscing. Checking the settings, he couldn't help but smile. He was just 32% away from senior apprentice. Reaching the next level was going to take a month at the most. What's wrong? Valinil asked, showing up next to him. Why did you stop practicing? The leader gave orders for quiet, the guard shot back rudely. We're close to Red Lake's territory. Tailyn looked around. Regardless of the falling darkness, everything within 100 meters was as plain as day thanks to his built-in scanner. Valinil had given him a great tip, having him head over to the market, buy simple hunter clothing, and turn his level 3 armor into them. There was a reason the Academy mages all looked identical in their white robes, despite the fact that they were actually wearing armor even better than Talyn's. And the boy had agreed. The idea was a good one. Seeing him as just one of them also helped everyone in Colmart forget the god's terrifying tribunal, and stop avoiding him. There's something out there, Tailyn said, squinting and hearing the guard's scornful snort. Just like everyone else, all the latter saw were simple clothes, but the boy didn't take his eyes off a large boulder right at the edge of his scanning range. His attention had been grabbed by a barely perceptible movement. It seemed like the stone had moved, and in the direction of the camp, too. There can't be anything out there, the guard deigned to answer, but Tailyn just raised his voice in excitement, pointing out into the darkness. The boulder really had moved. His perception gave him nothing, almost as if it were just a rock, but the boy grew sure with each passing second. There's something hiding under that rock, and they're crawling toward us. The guard glanced oddly at the boy, no longer snorting. Where is he? Valinil knew Tailyn wouldn't panic without a good reason, so she activated her cards just in case. While she couldn't show it, the gray land scared her, too. Over there, the boy said, as he jabbed a finger into the darkness. Do you really not see it? Suddenly, it hit the boy that neither the guard nor Valinil could see what he was seeing, and so he decided to prove to everyone that he was right. Kali. An enormous fireball soared into the sky. After reaching its set hundreds of meters, it began easing its way gently back down to Earth, casting a red glow on everything in the near vicinity as it did. That made it easy to pick out the boulder the boy was pointing at. However, a popping sound was heard at the same time. The rock, the second from the left, is coming toward us. Tailyn was pointing, but a powerful kick knocked him to the ground before he could finish what he was saying. What are you doing, idiot? The guard yelled, as he loomed over the boy. Valinil jumped over to protect her student, but the guard just threw her aside with a simple wave of his hand. Who launched that? A sleepy Barad appeared out of the main wagon. When he saw Tailyn lying on the ground, his face twisted in rage. You? Our defenses are down because of you? For that... Nobody found out what he was going to get for his blunder. The fireball finally hit the ground, and night fell again. But just then, a prolonged lix howl broke out, and Tailyn could even tell what the creature was saying. Outsiders in the steppe. We found them. Circle the wagons. Horses in the middle, Barad barked, quickly taking charge. Prepare for battle. The caravan began moving. The wagons circled. The fires were put out. A few wagons were set right in the middle, and the numericals were all stuck onto them. After making sure everything was well in hand, Barad went back over to the troublemakers. Why the hell did you launch that? He asked ominously. Tailyn kept a guilty silence, leaving the guard to reply for him. He noticed Sloane, thought he was a monster, decided to show us. And why the hell didn't you tell him our guy was out there? That we have a protective dome over the camp and can't breach it? Barad exploded. He's a kid. A useless idiot just like all the rest of them. You know what, Zaril? Right now, you're taking your position, but once this is over,
You're going to be the one to dig our waste holes until we get back to base. Go.
Is there anything we can help with? Valinil asked.
I tell you, but it's not the time for that, Barad replied angrily. I wanted this to be nice and easy, but no, there's always an idiot. Okay, let's see what you've got.
Barad Gor's inviting you to join Atrium. Nothing changed for Tailyn. Without access to the functionality, he couldn't see anyone else's frames, though Valinil grunted enviously. Barad did as well. He hadn't known how useful Tailyn could be.
You take the southern sector. Don't let the animals get close to the wagons. Sloan, get your ass over here.
Tailyn jumped when the stone straightened up and turned into one of the caravan's fighters. How high was his concealment, if level 2 perception, coupled with level 13 enhancement, was powerless against him? Tailyn, follow me, Valinil ordered, and a few moments later, they were on top of one of the wagons. A couple other fighters were on the neighboring wagons, so the southern flank was covered. How are your cards? Maxed out. Just in case, Tailyn checked them all, and another Lix howl broke out right then.
They're on the old road. I can sense crystal fences.
Valinil cursed. It was quiet enough that only Tailyn could hear her, but she didn't hold back. Is something wrong? Tailyn asked with a frown. We need to make a break for it as soon as the battle's over, the woman replied softly. Here I am trying to figure out why Isor sends you out on a campaign, and with a group like this, too. The old bastard. I knew Valia wouldn't be this easy to get back. Shit. You understand the lixes, Tailyn suddenly realized. You know what they said. Of course, Valinil said, as if it meant nothing. And don't even ask me what that took, but it was worth it. One kidnapping was enough. Now, I need to know what those animals are saying. If I'd understood your Caddo gear back in the City of the Dead, maybe I'd have been able to give you a warning. That explanation made enough sense that Tailyn relaxed. It was true. Understanding your main enemies was important in the Borderlands. But what's so dangerous about crystal fences? He asked, as he looked around. The fighters were nervously peering into the dark, and the boy had no doubt most of them were using scanners that could see well beyond 100 meters. They're not taking us into Lix territory to find Valia. That was just an excuse to safely get out of the city without raising suspicion. No, they're here to trade the numericals for crystals. But we destroyed the city. What would they need people for? Tailyn asked in shock. Who said one was Halas's only master? That Lix is too strong to only have one. No, he needs new victims, and they're carrying us to slaughter. And I jumped right in like an idiot. Lixes! Someone shouted, and the air around them filled with screams of pain. But they weren't human. It was the monsters. The attack had come from the eastern flank, the side Barad was guarding. Tailyn watched the whole area turn into a fiery carpet. The red lixes were very different from their black and green brothers, looking more like animals than intelligent creatures. Wild and unrestrained, they rushed fearlessly on ahead, despite the fire in their path. Tailyn's attention was drawn by the movement in the south. A dozen lixes were trying to flank around them. Apparently, not all of them wanted to die that idiotically. Tailyn decided to wait for them to get close enough to make his fire a sure thing. Only they were in no hurry to approach the caravan. Not only that, but they were right at the edge of his scanning range. Neither his wave of fire nor fireballs were going to reach them. His electric strike might have, but there was no reason to spend charges yet, as Tailyn wanted to see what the lixes were up to. The creatures had bunched up and were discussing something, their arms gesticulating wildly. The boy looked around. Barad was still bathing the lixes on his side with fire. Still coming, they couldn't care less about the losses they were taking, though the silence on the other sides of the caravan was unsettling. The Reds couldn't be that dumb. There was no such thing in a world as harsh as the one they lived in. Tailyn's attention was once again captured by the lixes on his side. Their meeting was over, and they were setting up some kind of device. It was hard to tell from that distance what it was, though it spoke to the monster's intelligence regardless. Something's about to happen, the boy whispered to Valinil. The lixes are setting up...
Catapults!
One of the fighters shouted above the lix screams. Tailyn, shield! This is real. An iron-reinforced rectangle the size of a door appeared in Valinil's hands. Tailyn had never seen a shield that big. It would have been enough to shelter an entire wagon, let alone a person.
Sloan, get to work,
Barad barked, unable to pull himself away.
On it,
came a response from somewhere outside the circle, but that was when the enemy machines unleashed their fire. Tailyn's scanner showed something like alchemical flasks flying in their direction, and his chest tightened. There were so many of them. Alchemical fire! Valinil yelled, and Tailyn froze. A shield appeared in his hands, if not as big as Valinil's. Still, it was plenty for him. There was no running from alchemical fire. When it hit the ground, it spread in every direction, scorching everything it touched. The only thing you could do was hide behind a shield and let it take the hit. Of course, the shield would be useless after that, but it was enough to survive. You just had to throw away the heated metal in time. Tailyn pressed his shield against Valinil's the way they'd practiced, in that moment, realizing that actual battle was much simpler than the way they trained. His scanner worked hand in hand with his perception, which meant he knew what was coming their way, even before the herbalist yelled it out. But those labels hadn't been there during practice. It wasn't there. Something hit their shields, glass shattered, and Valinil yelled at the boy. "Get rid of it." The burning shields flew away from the wagon. Sadly, not everyone had been as lucky, with half the wagons burning brightly. 2 mercenaries screamed as they rolled around on the ground. Nobody went over to help them, however. It was almost impossible to put out alchemical fire, and it didn't look like anyone had the thick cover it would have taken. "They're reloading." Tailyn saw the lixes fiddling with the catapult yet again. "It's no good." Kali. 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 10 electric strikes rained down, and the lixes convulsed, no longer able to do damage. "Where are you going?" Valinil screamed, when Tailyn leaped lightly down to the ground and ran off toward the enemy. Less than 100 meters meant they were at most 20 seconds away, so the boy hit them yet again, to give himself another 30. What interested him were the 5 shimmering red flasks the lix had dropped in the catapult. The creatures were all at level 10, so dealing with them quickly was out of the cards, and that left an awfully foolhardy move. Tailyn dropped the flasks into his inventory and pulled out his next card. Kali. The wave of fire engulfed the lixes and told everyone else exactly where he was. And while he couldn't wait 40 seconds for the flames to burn themselves out, Tailyn at least got lucky in that the lixes died quickly and left their loot behind. There hadn't been a message about loot in the group, so the boy held his breath and ducked quickly into his own fire. Placing a hand on a body, he dashed back out and brushed himself off, stunned at his own power. How long had he been in there? A second? 2? And his shield was almost a quarter gone. Opening his visor to let fresh air into his costume, and to get rid of the heat, Tailyn couldn't suppress a grin. His plan was a success. Loot received. Alchemical fire potion, times 15. Acid spittle potion, times 15. Accelerated growth potion, times 3. Lesser armor, times 8. Intellect ring 1. Lesser staff. Turning around, Tailyn sprinted back toward the wagons, only to just about trip and fall when the night sky was lit up with a red star Barad launched. That was immediately followed by the sound of a trumpet and a happy cry from the lixes.
"Fall back. They're friendlies. Move out."
Friendlies?
"You lost, kid?"
Sloane appeared in front of Tailyn, who had stopped.
"You picked the wrong time to start throwing fireballs around."
The fighter held up a closed hand and blew into the boy's face. Tailyn was surprised to notice he wasn't holding a card, though that was the last thing he saw that night. His eyes rolled back, his legs wobbled, and he crashed to the ground. The lotus pollen had worked instantaneously. Chapter 2.
"So we made a mistake. Happens to the best of us. We were expecting a caravan from Larunda. Also a bunch of fences, but different ones. We saw the signal and figured you were them."
The Red Lix's guttural voice pulled Tailyn back into the real world. He groaned, his head splitting, only he found that the groan was muffled by the gag in his mouth. But as soon as he broke out in a sweat, figuring his headgear had been stolen, he realized the card interface was still in place. He cursed to himself. Why had he pulled the visor back? The pollen wouldn't have gotten through his hermetic seal.
"And that's what you want me to tell Halas?"
Barad replied rudely, and Tailyn's attention switched entirely to the conversation. That name was too familiar. Not only that, but Barad was speaking with the Lix in the creature's own language, making yet another person who could understand them. It was getting to be a crowd.
"But I wasn't able to deliver the goods because of a tribe of Reds?"
"Why would you tell him that?" the Lix asked indignantly. "A human here, a human there, and the Supreme Leader won't notice. But the Reds will remember Barad's kindness, and reply in kind."
"What do I care about your kindness?"
the crystal fence asked with a snort.
"I was taking Halas 50 bodies in exchange for 5 crystals. Now, I have 20 left, and half of them are just about burned to death.
They might not live out the day, and it's going to take us another week to get to the meeting point.
This is a problem, Shaman Murodiv. Honestly, I don't know what to do.
Human, you're great and powerful. Help us capture the caravan from Lorunda, and you'll get all the people they have. That despicable Finny Ilor is in charge. He doesn't want to work with red lixes. Thinks we're stupid, and we want to get back at him for that.
Sloan? Barad asked, instead of replying. A serious player, came the reply. 10 fighters, all 25 or higher. Well-equipped, well-trained rangers. It won't be easy.
We'll overwhelm him, the Lix said. We have lots of inferiors, and they don't have anything to eat. They'll go in first to attract attention. In the meantime, you can sneak in and take them out. Great loot, great revenge, new slaves, lots of slaves.
Finny is at capacity, Sloan replied in confirmation. 70 at least. Enough for 7 crystals. Plus ours. Whatever's left. Okay, Murodiv. Let's hear your plan.
The voices dropped, and Tailyn couldn't pick out a single word, no matter how hard he tried. Finally, Barad laughed as he boomed out.
Deal. I like your plan, Murodiv. It should work, though I do have a problem. There are 2 mages in with my slaves. They need special treatment. I was paid well for the boy's head, so he can't make it back to the city, though he also needs to survive until our meeting with the Blacks. Halas is going to give us 2 crystals for him. Got it?
How could I not get it, Barad, my friend? Your slaves are in good paws, their hands tied, their mouths shut. What are they going to do? Plus, one's still tiny, and the other's a female. Don't worry. My best apprentice, one blessed by Halas, will keep an eye on them. Actually, he's barely an apprentice. I'll be learning from him soon enough. We can have your slaves back in our den within 2 days, and it's just 1 more day to the Forest of Desire.
New mission. Isor's betrayal. Description. You found out that your guardian, Isor Barca, paid a crystal fence to get you out of the city and have you destroyed. However, Barad Ghor decided not to kill you, and instead sell you to the Black Lixes for 2 crystals. Go back to Kulmart and accuse Isor Barca of attempted murder. You are permitted to ask for divine intervention in order to prove your innocence. Divine intervention. Tailyn already knew what that was, thanks to Valinil. There had been a paragraph on it right at the beginning of the book, too. As it turned out, not everyone was born with the same rights. Their opportunities depended on the family they were born into, with more doors open to them at higher ranks. For example, they could ask the god to settle arguments or punish wrongdoers. That was what Valia had been trying to do, only she'd made a mistake. Despite everything he'd done, there had been nothing to punish Dort for. Tailyn, of course, thought death was too good for the other boy, but Valia had known what the consequences were, as they were beaten into the head of the Highborn from day 1. Her emotions had gotten the better of her, however, and she'd paid for that, the divine intervention turning around to bite her. Talyn's nose tickled, and he lost his train of thought. An attempt to scratch it reminded him that his hands were tied. Almost as if on cue, his muscles began to ache, his body itched, and the tips of his fingers started going numb. Tailyn tried wriggling around to alleviate the discomfort, and that was when he saw Valinil. She'd been tied up far more rigorously than the boy had, with ropes wrapped around her entire body, and not just her arms and legs. She'd been turned into a completely immobile cocoon. A light shone, and clawed paws grabbed the prisoners. Before he was thrown roughly into one of the wagons, Tailyn noticed the procession of bound numericals. They were standing there meekly, having resigned themselves to their fate, ready to follow the wagon the moment it started moving. A plump Lix sat down next to Tailyn and placed his spear against his throat. Feeling the cold metal, the boy just about lost whatever was left of his courage. It isn't every day you find yourself a hair's breadth away from death. His personal shield was gone, but after pulling himself together, the boy took a look at his opponent, checking out his attributes. Lu Vir Div, Red Lix, Shaman, Age, 32, Level 17. Main parameters, Shield level, 1,544. Mana level, 2,149. Physical attack, 244. Magic attack, 266. Tailyn grunted when he realized his perception was high enough to see the Lix's hidden parameters. Of course, there wasn't much use in that, but he liked the direction things were moving in. He'd only been able to see numericals previously. The wagon bumped along mercilessly, and the spear pierced the boy's skin a few times, keeping his shield from regenerating. But no matter how slowly the procession was moving,
The Lix spent the
Sample complete. Ready to continue?